So talk a little bit about writing for Carol. Was there any like code words or jargon for how you would write a script for her, or?
No. No. It was just a pleasant experience, but I keep reiterating that it was very professional. I mean, if people didn't know what we were doing and that we weren't dressed, like stupid little kids, and writers didn't have their baseball caps on backwards or whatever. I mean, you could think it was an accounting firm, because it started at 10, and most of the time people went home at 6, which I never had after that. This was like a unique experience. And except for close to the end, when Kenny, Arnie, and I would sit and punch up everything, and then maybe I was coming home much later. I had a baby while I was on the Carol Burnett show, and I worked the day that I delivered, and she sent a diaphragm to the hospital. And I was back very soon.
How did you write the physicality of Carol's script? Was that written into the script?
Yes. I mean, the physical humor, yes, definitely. And again, it was choreographed. It's that stuff is not sloppy. It's very, very precise, and it's written in. And especially like that first sketch that I was telling you about with Jim Neighbors, and they were dealing with crutches and things like that, and they were hitting each other in the head, and I think one of them had a cast on, and it's really choreographed. And she liked it that way, except for the times that we sent her out the window, which was a lot. You ever, I don't think anybody has ever sat down and watched the whole thing, but it happened. It happened a lot.
Did you work on the department for Carol and Sis?
We did some Carol and Sis. And I think the one that I described to you with the green makeup and the boss coming to dinner was a Carol and Sis. But that one surprisingly never got on. It was like we were writing that from like 1951. I don't know. They thought, young, new, hip writers, this is going to be great. And here we come up with something that, Lucy wouldn't have used, So yes, we did do some Carol and Sis. And we knew right away that she wanted that to be a department. That was right from the beginning. And, as you know and I know, but not everybody knows, that she had a big hand in raising her younger sister, who she calls Sis.
Right. So when you did a movie spoof, how did you go about picking the movie you were going to spoof?
Doing a movie spoof was like some of the most glorious times that you could have, because you got to go watch a movie. And I don't remember if it was like, to me, in my imagination now, it was like the kid from high school who ran the projector, came in and put the movie on, because it wasn't on a DVD or something like that. So we obviously had to watch a movie on an actual with sound, an actual projector with sound. But you got to have a couple of hours off watching the movie. And so the movie was picked, prior to anything, like so that you would say to Arnie, I'd like to do a takeoff on, something specific. They did Gone with the Wind. We didn't write the Gone with the Wind sketch, but it was a specific movie. And you went and saw the movie. that was like free time. It was like being in high school that you got to see the movie. And then we didn't do outlines really, but maybe we knew that a star was coming on the show and that they would be part of it, and so they would be written in. And Carol loved having a precise character. So doing the movie takeoffs was a great thing for her because she could do the takeoff on that really precise character. And the sketch was written just like any other sketch would be written. Notes. I've never handed anything in where they didn't say, you know, okay, this could be funnier. You wrote it as funny as you possibly could. This could be funnier. And then you go back to your office and you think, oh my God, my career is over. This is it. This is the end. I can never think of anything funny again in my life. And then, you know, Kenny and I would get into it. And that's, of course, the big advantage of having a partner, is that you get each other silly and that you can hear it right away, you know. Otherwise, and I've written alone a lot, you have to hear it in your head, which is harder.
Were there any movie spoofs that you wanted to do that either got rejected or you couldn't quite figure out how to do it?
I can't remember that. One of the best ones, and I don't think we did this one either, was on Love Story. Because, see, again, it was like, even though we sent her out windows, she liked the small moments. I think, you know, it was something where Harvey said, and we're going to have a wonderful life or whatever, and she went, and you just, I mean, that was the beginning of her dying. And that was a really successful one. But mostly they were old movies. You know, and she loved old movies. And that was a contemporary one, which was quite unusual.
Were you involved in the Sunnyset Boulevard sketch?
I don't think so. It's funny how, you know, I don't want to ever take credit for anything that even when there's a line in something that somebody else has written, I'm always saying, well, we didn't write that line. But no, I don't think so. Kenny will tell me later on the phone, yes, we did. But I would have remembered.
A couple of the other sketches involved some of the big guest stars. I'm not sure if you worked on these or not, but did you work on the Brown Derby sketch with Bing Crosby and Bob Hope?
No. I mean...
Did you get a chance to write for them at all?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
No. But some of the other stars we absolutely did. We did the Betty Grable one.
What did you write for her?
As the Stomach Turns she was in. And Martha Ray was on. She was in one of those. So, I mean, the biggest moments, Kenny was really in love with Ethel Merman, and she came on. And he couldn't wait to see her on that Wednesday when we would actually get to see them perform. And so he was all sitting up in his chair, and then she came out. It's in a big room, and cue cards went up in front of her, like this far away from her face. Nobody saw her. But I think she sang something like ridiculous, like Gentle on My Mind. I mean, anyway, you were talking about big stars.
How do you approach writing for them differently than you do for the rest of the cast?
The big stars?
Yeah.
No, and it's amazing what they were willing to do. I mean, I don't think anybody came in and said, I refuse to do this sketch. Although Kenny and I wrote Sills and Burnett at the Met, which was a special for Carol Burnett. And we had written a sketch that Beverly Sills was uncomfortable with. And that's the only time that I can sort of remember a big star saying that they really, and she didn't say, I don't like it. She was just uncomfortable with it. And we replaced it immediately.
Do you remember what it was?
What was thrown out?
Yeah.
Yes, I do, because those are the ones you remember, right? It was something about the Met was having children in, some sort of charity children. I don't remember anything more than that, but we ended up doing an audition where Beverly Sills and Carol Burnett were up for the same part in an opera. And Carol was like this really like cheesy secretary type who was sleeping with the producer. And Beverly Sills was the big talent. And of course, Carol was going to get the job.
You mentioned Lucille Ball was on the show when you were there. Did you write for her?
I think we did, and I don't remember what, and I don't, it's all a blank.
One of the skits that she was in was the Rock Sisters. Did you have anything to do with that one?
No.
And when Jerry Lewis was on, did you write for him?
You don't these remember? People, I don't remember now. Yeah. I remember more clearly Carol.
Right.
It's funny.
Well, let's talk about
because they were cast.
Right.
You have to realize that they, we would know they were coming. We might write something that was specifically for them, but mainly we put them in the things that we had done before that we were doing.
So let's talk about the cast. Let's talk a little bit about writing specifically for Harvey Korman.
Harvey could do anything. I mean, Harvey could do anything and did anything. He used to walk around in a jumpsuit. That was Harvey's look, with a big zipper. I mean, it wasn't a big zipper; it was just a long zipper. He chuckled a lot with us. He was really great, but he could do anything. And so when you wrote for him, you didn't have to think. Like, I mean, many times in my career, I've thought, can this person do this part? But it was the opposite. It was, oh, this is a good idea. Harvey can do it. Sure he can. He can do anything. And he got every laugh possible.
Talk a little bit about writing for Vicki Lawrence.
Vicki at the beginning was very quiet and didn't say a word, and then she started to blossom. And they didn't give her much to do at first. And then all of a sudden, people started noticing, I'm talking about people on the show, that she could handle some of the comedy. And so that's when she started getting more. But I don't think it was in the first 2 years at all. I think it took a while. Well, my God, she was a high school, talk about college. This was her education, I mean, everybody knows this story about Carol going down to see her in a show, and I guess she wrote a letter saying, people say I look like you. And Carol had the idea to do Carol and Sis, and that's what Vicki was hired for. That and only that. And then look what happened. It was funny because on one of the shows where later, when they did the specials, looking back, which became like clip shows, Harvey said, I mean, they were all sitting there. It was Harvey and Tim and Carol and maybe Lyle. Anyway, he said, isn't it amazing that Vicki's the only one working? So she really, she blossomed and blossomed and blossomed.
Talk a little bit about working for Lyle Wagner.
Lyle was there to be the handsome guy. And they were going to use him in. They used him in questions and answers a lot, and for Carol to like drool over. And then in most of the sketches that he was in, he was the handsome guy. So you just fit in the handsome guy. There goes my Band-Aid. The handsome guy into the sketch, and talk about being typed, and he handled it very well. He really did handle the material very well.
Talk about writing for Tim Conway.
Now, Tim Conway, again, we were hired outside of the show. Tim, at the beginning, was a guest star. And then he was asked to bring in his own material, to bring in 6 sketches. Again, I think it was really 6, same amount. And he hired Kenny and me to write 6 sketches for him, knowing that we were on the show and that we would probably, know what would be good for him and what to do. And one of those sketches was the dentist sketch. And it kills me because every single time it's mentioned that Tim wrote it. And it kills me because he added to it. So it's like a really 50-50, maybe 60-40 type of proposition. Because the dentist sketch had the premise of a dentist on his first day at work, which was, that's a typical sketch premise, the first day of, because it's, it's going to be funny because they're going to mess up. And so we wrote a dentist on his first day of work, and I think it was just supposed to be Novocaine in the hand. Well, the way we pictured it, it was going to happen pretty quickly, and it would atrophy and whatever. Tim made it go on for, 20 minutes, that laugh. Harvey really lost it. He was the patient in the dental chair. And then Tim went on from there, and he did improvise. He was the only one on the show who did. And he did it to make Harvey laugh. Anything he, or Carol at times, but mainly Harvey. And he took the needle and he put it in his leg, and he fell to the floor. And I think, I don't remember which was first, but he put the needle in his head. And the expression on his face, and we did not do this. We did not add that. That was Tim. And he was brilliant, and he's a really good writer himself. But it's still, I'm glad that I am given the opportunity to get it on record that we wrote that sketch first. It was added to and embellished and made great, actually.
In 1973, the writing staff won an Emmy for the Steve Lawrence and Lily Tomlin episode. How did that honor feel to win an Emmy?
Well, just to go back a little, we were nominated every year. So here I was in New York with my parents took me to the Emmys. I was already married, but he was out here in Hollywood. I was in New York with my parents. My father gave, our car over to a valet parker, and valet parkers were a new thing in life. He thought he'd never see his car again. And they did the Emmys half in New York, and they went back and forth between New York and Hollywood. And we were at a table. And just being nominated was just, and really, everybody says that, but it was just ridiculous. But finally winning, now that was great. I could have worn something better, but it was a bad choice. But it was great. It's an unbelievable statue. It's the most beautiful award of all the awards. The Oscar, it's like straight little man. But this is like this winged beauty. It's so gorgeous. And they let you take it home. I mean, they don't know who's going to win it, but there is, in the front, they finally put your name, but you just get the front part. But you walk around with it, and it's amazing. And you can't believe that you're an Emmy winner. I mean, I was, see again, you're getting me emotional. But it's really, it's so exciting. I presented an Emmy once.
Who did you present to?
I presented it to, there were two writers who I knew, and it was for half-hour situation comedy. And when they get up on stage, I don't have the tape, but I know it exists, but they say, they're like disappointed because they thought it would, a star was giving it to them. And one of them says, "Oh, it's Gail." I can't remember their names, but anyway, that wasn't as exciting. That was pretty exciting. But winning one was, it's great. They're so beautiful.
So now, did you leave the show for a season in the middle of your run?
I did.
Why did you leave?
It seemed to, I was doing a lot of other things, and it was sort of, they never, it was, like I said, it was run very strictly. So I had to go away and promote a book, and I had to go away, and we did a Broadway show, and I was always asking permission to leave, and which was not the greatest idea. And anyway, but then I got scared and ran back.
So you went back
home.
for one more season.
Yes, and that was the season we won the Emmy. I mean, that was the year.
And then why did you leave for good?
I was doing, there's a point, writers really don't stay forever on a staff. I mean, 5 years is a long time, and this was in the 6th year. You really don't. Well, I was probably fired, but besides that, you just don't. You really do run dry a little, and maybe there's something else. And I was being offered a lot of things, and it was an opportunity to do other things, and that was exciting. So it just didn't seem that I had to run home and stay home any longer. But I guess I don't think anybody was there the whole 11 years.
What do you think is the legacy of the Carol Burnett Show?
The Carol Burnett Show has made, here's what I hear from people. It's a huge legacy. People have told me about this and Golden Girls. My mother was very ill, and the only thing that cheered her up was the Carol Burnett Show. And, especially since DVDs have happened and whatever. The same thing with Golden Girls. It's usually my mother, not my father. But I think that, that's what it has done over the years and decades now, has made people feel good. So, if you're healthy and young and you're laughing and your grandmother watched it with you, you have that memory. A lot of people have a memory. Minerva Elizabeth Taylor used to say, "My daughter wrote that show." But a lot of people have a memory of watching and where they were and how they watched. And then later on, a lot of people have said to me, "My mother, you really made my mother die happy." I know she didn't die happy, but people loved it so much And it made them happy and comfortable and feel better. So I said, writing comedy, I think, is like, it's like being a doctor in some ways. But I hear that. I hear it from people all the time. I mean, not every day, but a lot of the time.
While you were on the Carol Burnett show, you worked on a couple Carol specials. You already talked about Sills and Burnett, but talk a little bit about your memory of the Bing Crosby and Carol Burnett special.
Well, my personal experience on the Bing Crosby Carol Burnett special was that I was giving birth at that time. And my deal, and this was not David Geffen, it was somebody else. No, it was the Bing Crosby people who wanted this deal, was that if I gave birth during the writing period, then I would have to give back some of the money. So I gave birth, and I came back, and I never told them that I had a baby. And Bing Crosby looked at me, and he was like, he knew something was different. He didn't know what. And I went right on. So that's my personal experience with it. Again, it was like it's Bing Crosby. I may not have touched him. I mean, I'm talking about physically, but I may have touched. I know I touched the paper that touched him. So that's pretty exciting.
You also, during the time of the Carol Burnett show, did a few other shows. So talk about Anne Margaret, the Anne Margaret special that you worked on, From Hollywood with Love.
With Anne Margaret, we had, Kenny and I always had this premise in the back of our minds, which is that you go against type. And I remember we did that with her a bit. Here she was, this adorable redhead, very cute. And again, it was exciting because Bye Bye Birdie and all of those, the movies that she was in. I mean, this was a movie star. This is not just a television star. Bing Crosby, too. But, I mean, a lot of people. Betty Grable, by the way. And so, it was a short period of time. I don't have stories from it, really. But I know that we were lucky to get it. And we wrote against type. And we were very popular in those days. It was because, again, there were these females, and to get a male-female team was really advantageous. It was advantageous to us to be one.
You also worked on The Many Sides of Don Rickles. What's your memory of working on that show?
Talk about, going against type. I mean, he was fun, but as I said before, it's, the star usually sets the mood of the show. So I wouldn't say that he was, the most relaxed person in the world. He wasn't mean. I mean, I would say if he was mean. But we went against type. And what we did was we wrote a sketch about him being a monk. And I think he was in a monastery where he couldn't talk. Now, for a sketch, that's good. By the way, for a half-hour situation comedy, to change somebody's character, that's bad. But for this, it was fine. And I would say that Kenny would say the same thing, that he would remember that sketch on that special as the one that we probably started with.
Was it a challenge to switch from writing for someone like Carol Burnett to writing for someone like Don Rickles?
Always. I mean, it's, you have to hear it. Either you hear it in your head and you hear the way they speak, or you don't. And, hearing is a really important part of writing. And I'm always saying about people, like comedy rhythms change and different stars have different comedy rhythms, but they also change over the years, over the decades. We don't do campy anymore, for example. And with Don Rickles, you had to hear what he sounded like. And having a good ear is really half the battle, because then, you're getting it down on paper. But again, because we could verbalize it, Kenny and I, when we were doing it, not that we stood up and acted like Don Rickles, we didn't do that, but we could hear that it would be right for him. How we got the job, I don't know. Why would they think that we were right for it? There was one special, I wish I could remember which one it was, where they thought we were Bill Angelo and Buzz Cohen. Because they thought that we wrote music. And there was a piano in our office, and I didn't know why. I couldn't figure out why there was a piano. And finally, the producer came in and said, well, are you writing the lyrics? And I said, are those the words? And it was at that point, I think, that they realized that they had hired the wrong team for this show. Anyway, we got through it. Somehow. I never wrote lyrics.
That's great. And so you wrote an episode of The Bill Cosby Show. So is this your first time writing a sitcom at this point?
It was. That was the first half hour. As I told you, after that, we wrote a pilot which got on the air. It was a pilot for a Tim Conway show, and it got on the air for 13 weeks. But Bill Cosby was the first, I really don't remember too much about it, and I think that's a good thing, because I know other people who have worked on the Bill Cosby show later on, who are on the staff. He wasn't that easy with writers, but I don't think we had much contact with him.
Did you approach writing a scripted series different than writing a variety sketch? Writing a half hour is a whole different experience. And again, we didn't have courses in it, and I don't really know how we learned to do it. I don't know how we learned to do it, or it was just something that it was instinctual. Tell us a little bit more about the Tim Conway pilot that you wrote.
It was about an airline, about a charter airline, which actually became a show, didn't it? Yes, it did. There was
Wings.
Wings, yes. And it was, it was broad, I think. Now, we wrote the pilot, and then one day I came home and there was like this beautiful basket of flowers and fruit on my doorstep with a card that said, so the premise was ours. And we wrote the pilot, and the card said, "You are a true professional." And I had no idea what that meant. I mean, we were working on Burnett. I had no idea where the flowers and fruit came from. Well, it turned out that it came from the network, and they were just trying to tell us that, don't worry, you're not a bad writer, but we've hired Larry Gelbart to rewrite you. But it took me, it was just such a puzzle. I mean, Kenny got it also, and flowers and fruit, and it would have been nice to really know where it came from before, I guess I tracked it down. So that was, but the premise was ours, and it was about a charter airline.
And it did air, but you didn't write the scripts.
It aired for 13 weeks, and that Tim actually had a license plate that said 13 weeks on it. because he had like 3 series in a row that lasted 13 weeks. Yes.
In 1971, you wrote an episode of The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, I loved the show, and we went in. I think it was about a play, or I think that was the premise of it, and it was a pretty formal atmosphere. By then, situation comedies had had grown into more of a science, let me say. And so they, you went in, you pitched, they chose an idea, and it was Jim Brooks and Alan Burns. Alan Burns. And Jim, who I was just on a panel with, and I tell him every time I see him, we're so responsible for starting so many women in comedy writing. Because I think it went back to, there was an episode on Mary about how expensive it was to be a bridesmaid. And it was like so bewildering to them, a topic that they had never heard of or thought of or anything, that they really realized that women would be a great asset for the show. So what I remember is going in, pitching it. Again, the process had been really refined by then. So your deal was always to write a first draft and then to get notes and write a second draft and to get notes and write a polish, which is what we did. And then the staff punched up and, wrote for their characters better, like all situation comedies do. And then we went to the taping, and just to hear, you hear Jim Brooks laughing on every single Mary Tyler Moore show, but I got to hear it like in person. He like really would lose it, and he would laugh so freely. I don't think I've ever had an experience like that before or since. It sounds like I'm talking about sex, doesn't it? But he was... It was great because he was such a great audience, even after the first draft, second draft, polish and punching and everything. So, it was a great experience. And to this day, people say, well, you wrote a Mary Tyler Moore show, and it seems like much more than it was because it was such a popular show, but I was just lucky to be part of it. And as a result of that, I wrote 2 Rhodas, which were before she got married. And I know one was The Shower. And the premise was, I guess Mary was giving her the shower, and the premise was that they didn't know who to invite. And they look in her phone book. I think that's what it was. And it ends up people she hardly knows, and there was a nun there. That was great, and there were huge audiences before she got married, and then you take a single girl, and you love her as a single girl, and then she got married, and it didn't work as well because she was too happy.
So speaking of single girls, in 1972 you published the novel Sheila Levine is Dead and Living in New York. So how did that idea come about? How did you get into writing novels?
I asked Kenny if he wanted to write a screenplay about a single girl in Manhattan, and he said it's been done. And I knew that there was so much more to tell. My best friend, who I grew up with, whose name is Gail, was single at the time, and I married my teacher in college because I couldn't be single for 1 second, and she went through all those experiences of renting a house on Fire Island and going to Europe in the summer, and so I decided that there was a lot to write about, and that I wasn't going to write something that was theatrical because I felt that I would be cheating on Kenny. But a novel would be something different, and I wouldn't be, that would be okay. And I think what really made it work was that I figured out that it should be a suicide note. And it was a 221-page suicide note. And that's what the reviewers really, praised me for, because it was something different. It's hard between two covers to come up with, a different way of doing something. But I was able to, and it was successful, and I was really surprised. It was such a different experience than working in television, because I would say to my agent, are they really going to publish it? Because in television, maybe it is and maybe it isn't, but once they committed, yes. And then I found out that in 220 pages, you got fewer notes than you did on a 26-page script, which was another huge surprise to me. And so it was a very free form. That I have the title of the sequel, but I never knew what else to write about it. It would be Sheila Levine is still dead and living in New York, but that's all I have. Oh, I have the first line too, which is, rarely is there a sequel to a suicide note. That's it. Maybe someday I'll think of the rest.
We'd like you to.
Yeah, that would be nice. It would be nice.
But it was made into a feature film, which Kenny directed.
No, he didn't.
He didn't direct it?
Sidney Furie directed it.
Okay.
Which is, it was a horrible, horrible movie, and it was a horrible experience. And somebody is writing a book on Sidney Furie, and he, called. And he said, Sidney Furie is going to say that, it was a terrible experience. He knows it was a terrible experience. So, he was passionate, but the whole script was changed. And it was when people say to me, I've seen your movie, I say, I'd like to give you back the money to this day. Because it was only $5 in those days, maybe. But so I could have handed out, by now I could have handed out, about $5,000. But, the movie stank. Terrible.
In 1974, you worked on the TV special Annie and the Hoods. Tell us about that experience.
Well, Annie and the Hoods, again, it's funny. We must have had a formula, even though we didn't call it a formula, because I think the biggest sketch that I can remember was about her marrying a very New York girl marrying Prince Charles. And so, and Anne Bancroft was much classier than that. And, she was so beautiful and so funny and so graceful. But anyway, we made her a very New York broad named Bambi Levine, which was a name that we've used over the years. And because I was, or she would always say Bambi Levine. And I finally met a Bambi Levine in person, a real live one. But anyway, she was marrying Prince Charles. That was one of the sketches. So the hood part, Annie and the Hoods, where, it was motherhood, falsehood. There was a hood in the title of every sketch. And a very nice experience. She was, when you get a professional like that, it's such a gift. I mean, it's like, they're so good. I know why stars are hired over and over again. I think about that to this day. Why even in animated features, why they use this, because they're good. If somebody becomes very popular and very successful and has done, a few good projects, they're usually good. And she was great. Great actress.
In the early 70s, you made a couple of appearances on the Johnny Carson show. Tell us a little bit about working with Johnny.
Oh my God. There's one appearance on the Johnny Carson show where this bit goes on for so long. And again, I wasn't wearing a great dress. But it goes on for so long that I just saw it, like a year ago or so, and I hadn't seen it like in 20 years. I wanted to punch myself. It was just, oh, stop it already. Stop it. I was always scared to do those shows. I did Letterman too. And I did them, but I was always scared. And then I did them alone without Kenny sometimes, and it frightened me. But the one that was most successful was where we did applause lines, where where the audience applauds, where a guest star comes and sits down on the panel, and then obviously is looking for applause and says things like, maybe you like or don't like the man, but he's still the president of the United States, because it gets the audience to applaud. Or they'll say, my grandmother is, 97 years young today, and it gets the audience to applaud. So that was a successful one. The first time we were booked, he was still in New York, and I don't know how we did it, but we had a tiny dressing room again, no window, and we had all our friends from college come back, and we were doing bits. We were saying, "So good of you to come," and we had just graduated from college, and we were saying, we were just being big stars with towels around our neck, like it was like we had just given a Broadway appearance. And we could hear the show on a speaker. We didn't even have a television set in the room. And all of a sudden we heard, "That's all the time we have, so we don't have time for Gail Parent and Alan Soames." They didn't even say Kenny Soames. But we'll have them on soon. But so after all that, after all those people backstage, and what did my mother say? My parents were in the audience. My mother said, she had told my grandmother to watch. And she said, "I'm not going to call her. She doesn't sleep anyway." So we didn't get on, even though he said, "We'll have them back soon." It wasn't until they moved the show to California that we were back on. It was fun when it was over, but it wasn't. And it was fun when people said, "I saw you on," or a stranger would say, "I saw you on, Carson last night." Just a few years ago, I was at a dinner party with him, and it was a small dinner party. And I told him that story. And Neil Simon was at the dinner party, and he had a story. And Mr. Carson said, "We should do a book of those stories." And unfortunately, it never got done. But, the mishaps that went on backstage were pretty great.
That's great. In 1974, you wrote a Broadway musical called Lorelei. So tell us about that experience.
Broadway, it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was with Carol Channing, and so we wrote the book. And the first day of rehearsal, we was in New York, and she requested that we sit behind a screen because she didn't want anybody looking at her. It was the oddest thing. we opened in Oklahoma City. She was on like the weirdest diet. She had a big thermos, and she would put her hand in. She'd maybe come up with grapes, maybe a fish head, whatever was in there. Her husband, the first day, they redid the theater for us in Oklahoma. There was a kid laying carpet, and he said, "There is to be no turpentine or glue in this theater." This kid was 18 years old, and he said, "You keep this up, and you're going to have to find yourself a new Lorelei." To replace Carol Channing. He was going to go out and get another star. It was insane. Julie Stein, who wrote the music, it was based on Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, was so funny. He was so he had never been in Oklahoma. He was a New York person. He just lived and breathed New York. And he would get in a cab and he would say to some redneck, "Could you take me to a place where I can get a good piece of flankin'?" So it was like this group of people who were so, Comden and Green showed up. It was so out of place, but it was just so funny. And the show toured for a year around the country before it went to Broadway. But again, it was a really exciting thing to open on Broadway. It was big. It was a whole orchestra and big, and songs and big costumes. Although one guy lost 100 pounds, they asked him to lose weight, the lead. He was really heavy. And then they wanted him to take his own costumes in. So there's a memory.
In 1975, you became a writer on the Smothers Brothers show. So how did that come about?
Joe Hamilton produced that Smothers Brothers show. And Chevy Chase was on the staff. And we had a good writing staff, but it was the Smothers Brothers. And they were, quite crazy. And remember a long time ago I said that Carol Burnett set the pace on how everything went on the Carol Burnett show and how peaceful and happy it was? This was insane. This was, I lost weight every day because your stomach was upset. It was crazy. They were, Tommy was crazy, and he was, yelling, and it wasn't successful either, besides being crazy.
How did the tone of that show differ from their first show? Was it still as controversial?
Yes, they wanted it to be still as controversial. However, the world was a little less controversial then, I think. But we were looking for things all the time. Pat Proft was on that show. The writing staff was good, but they were involved with the writing. There was craziness.
Was there a lot of scrutiny with the scripts and censorship and?
Yes, but they loved that. There was nothing more that they loved than to go off the air or to be thrown out. They loved it. They craved it. They loved it. I don't think it happened on our show, but it happened on their other CBS show. And I like Tommy. I like him as a person, but working with them was difficult. They know it. They absolutely know it.
What was your role as producer on the show?
Well, I was like the producer in the booth, and Kenny was on the floor. And I ran up and down the steps all the time. But we was also being head writer, producer. You know, in television, you get the credit of producer a lot because writers are, you know, when you're successful, you can ask for that, and you can get that. And we actually, though, were the producers. I mean, in not only name, we actually did the stuff. You know, swept the stage and stuff like that.
What did you take from your time as a writer on the Carol Burnett that you brought to Smothers Brothers as producer?
Well, as producer, by then we knew how to write a sketch. So that was valuable. I mean, we couldn't have learned more on Burnett about, you know, what was good and what worked and what was funny and what was not, and working with all sorts of people, and especially doing it for 5 years. But producing, this was probably one of our first credits. But Joe Hamilton left it in our hands. He did. And what you're doing during the week as producer, you're not figuring out the money and how much, you know, the sets cost, because that would be a line producer. But you are controlling the material. So you're producing the material. As I always explain, show business, so you are showing the material. So we and then when we taped, that was me in the booth. Okay, we didn't get that shot. We didn't get that slice of comedy, and it's not going to look good, and it's not going to read funny. So we better do it again. And Kenny was on the floor working with the crazies.
And why didn't it last?
It was. They tried to recreate the first one, and it just wasn't as good. It was like the sequel, and not as good. I mean, the sketches were funny because we had really good writers, but it wasn't the same time. It wasn't the same, you know, what was going on in the country. There were, you know, all of those factors. It wasn't as good. So it was a replica rather than a total original. And they could be totally original. They're really smart and really funny.
So speaking of total originals, you were able to help create Mary Hartman. So what was your involvement in creating that show?
I was the first creator on it, and, you know, I was solo for a long time. So Norman Lear asked me to come in, and he said he wanted to do a funny soap opera. And I thought about it. I went away, thought about it, and then there was a cover of Life magazine, and there was a factory worker on it, and it was about, the article was about the town that this guy worked in, and I thought really that should be really the setting for it. And Norman agreed, and I wrote, for soap operas and for comedy soap operas, you write a Bible. So I wrote this, you know, it's more than a treatment, maybe 10 pages about what it's going to be about. But this actually took you a little more into a season about what can happen. And he looked at me one day and he said, "Louise Lasser," because I have this very slow way of talking, and so did she, and so I see how it happened. I mean, he really, Louise Lasser. And so we had that. We had it to begin with, and it was not a script, but it was bought by all 3 networks, or 4 networks. And it was every year, when it took quite a while to get on. And it was developed And then the other 3 came on when it actually went to series, and they added a lot of characters and stuff. I had the slutty sister. I had a lot of stuff. I have a treatment downstairs, and it says The Life and Times of Mary Hartman. And then in Norman Lear's handwriting, it's crossed out and it says Mary Hartman, Mary Hartman. So
I'm going to stop you there. We'll change tape and we'll pick up
okay,
with that story.
that should be worth about $1.50, that treatment.